When an officer receives an unexpected 911 call from a 3-year-old child, he assumes it must be a prank. But knowing that emergency calls should never be underestimated, he rushes to the scene, and what he finds turns his stomach. Could it simply be a child playing, or something far more horrifying? Let's find out. Also, let us know where you're listening from. The rain pounded against the windshield of Officer Daniel Dane's patrol car, blurring the fading light of that late October evening in Maplewood, a small town where everyone knew each other. Maplewood was usually peaceful, but that night, the relentless downpour added an eerie tension to the air. Dan, a veteran of the Maplewood Police Department with 20 years of service, was exhausted. His bones ached from the damp cold seeping through his uniform, despite the car's heater blasting at full force. He was looking forward to the end of his shift, a hot meal, and the comforting silence of his modest home. But just as he was about to relax, his radio crackled to life. Possible domestic disturbance at 123 A Avenue. The caller is a 3-year-old child. Dan frowned. A 3-year-old calling 911? It had to be a mistake, a child playing with a phone or a prank. Yet something in the dispatcher's voice, an uneasy mix of disbelief and concern, triggered his instincts. He couldn't ignore it. After 2 decades on the force, Dan had learned never to underestimate the seriousness of any call, especially when a child was involved. He flipped on his sirens, their wailing echoing through the stormy night. A howl cut through the steady rhythm of the rain. Elm was a quiet residential area lined with elegant single-family homes. As Dan approached 123, a small white house came into view, its yard overgrown, an old swing rusting in the backyard. A tricycle lay overturned on the sidewalk. A chill of unease ran down his spine. Stepping out of the car, the cold rain immediately soaked into his uniform. Dan approached the front door cautiously, his hand hovering near his holster. Muffled sounds came from inside, a soft sob, a rhythmic tapping that sent ice through his veins. He knocked firmly, his voice steady and authoritative. "Police. Open the door." For a moment, only silence answered him. Then, barely audible over the rain, came a small, trembling whisper. "Who is it?" Dan knelt by the door handle. "I'm a police officer. Can you open the door for me?" A soft click. The door creaked open just a few inches, revealing wide, tear-filled blue eyes. A small child no older than 3 stood clutching a worn-out teddy bear. His messy blonde hair stuck to his forehead, his face streaked with dirt and tears. Dan softened his voice. "Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head, his lower lip trembling. "No, but Grandpa fell down, and he won't wake up." A surge of adrenaline shot through Dan's body. This was no prank. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the living room. An elderly man lay sprawled on the floor, motionless. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool and something else, a faint metallic tang that churned Dan's stomach. He rushed to the man's side, his trained eyes assessing the situation. Mr. Robert Meller, thin and pale, was unconscious. His breathing was shallow and uneven. A dark red stain was slowly spreading beneath his head, seeping into the worn-out carpet. Dan's pulse quickened. He searched for a heartbeat weak, thready. Grabbing his radio, he barked, "Officer requesting immediate assistance at 123 Elm Avenue. Possible unconscious male, head injury. Need medical backup now." The little boy, still clutching his teddy bear, watched Dan with wide, fearful eyes. "Is Grandpa going to be okay?" he asked in a whisper, his voice barely audible. Dan forced a reassuring smile, though his gut twisted with concern. "We're going to take very good care of him," he promised, trying to project calm despite the urgency of the situation. As paramedics arrived, moving swiftly and efficiently, Dan gently guided the child away from the commotion, settling him onto an old sofa in the corner of the room. His gaze landed on a landline phone sitting on a nearby table, the receiver dangling off the hook. "Did you call 911? Dan asked. The little boy nodded. "Mommy taught me how," he said, a flicker of pride momentarily eclipsing the fear in his eyes. "She said if something bad happened, I should call 911 and tell them our address and my name." Dan was stunned. This child, barely old enough to tie his own shoes, had just done something extraordinary, harder to keep up. His health was declining, and although he loved his grandson deeply, he worried that he might not be able to care for him properly much longer. Dan listened intently as Mr. Mellor spoke, his voice laced with both love and regret. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, little Liam sat curled up in a chair, his teddy bear still clutched tightly in his arms. His wide eyes flicked between Dan and his grandfather, as if trying to process everything that had happened. Dan knelt beside him again, offering a reassuring smile. "You were incredibly brave tonight, champ. You saved your grandpa's life." Liam sniffled, rubbing his nose against the sleeve of his pajama, leaving behind a smudge of dirt. "I just wanted to help Grandpa," he murmured, his voice thick with tears. Dan felt a surge of admiration and protectiveness for the boy. This child, so small yet so strong, had done something extraordinary. And as he looked between Liam and Mr. Mellor, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of their story. Of Mr. Mellor and the challenges of caring for such an energetic child while dealing with his own declining condition. Dan couldn't shake the feeling that this call was more than just another case. Liam's bravery, his love for his grandfather, and the vulnerability in his eyes had deeply moved him. He felt a sense of responsibility toward the child, an urge to ensure his well-being that went beyond his duty as a police officer. As he drove back to the station, Dan wrestled with his thoughts. His duty was to uphold the law and protect citizens. But was he overstepping by interfering in Liam's family situation? Was he justified in reporting them to Child Protective Services, CPS? It was a gray area, one that made him deeply uncomfortable. Reporting the situation could have serious repercussions for Liam's parents, potentially even leading to the child being removed from their care. He decided to seek guidance from his captain, a woman he respected for her wisdom and compassion, Captain Laura Bannett. Dan explained the situation, his voice heavy with concern. "It's a complicated case," Captain Bannett said, leaning back in her chair with a furrowed brow. "You're right, it's a gray area, but you have a good heart and sound judgment. If you truly believe this child is at risk, you have an obligation to act. The system isn't perfect, but sometimes it's the only way to ensure a child's safety." With his captain's support, Dan contacted CPS, detailing his observations and emphasizing Liam's vulnerability, as well as the potential dangers of his situation. He stressed Mr. Mellor's declining health, Mr. Mellor's condition, and his inability to provide proper supervision for such an energetic child. He also mentioned the incident in the kitchen. Liam's eagerness to help had nearly caused a fire. The next day, a social worker named Emily Carter visited Mr. Mellor and Liam at the hospital. Dan waited anxiously for an update, his mind filled with conflicting emotions. He knew he had done the right thing, but he couldn't shake the feeling of guilt, the fear that he had disrupted this family's life in an irrevocable way. Later that afternoon, Dan received a call from Emily. "Officer Alice, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We've assessed the situation and will be providing support services to the family. We'll also be working with Mr. and Mrs. Mellor to ensure that Liam's needs are met. We'll arrange for in-home healthcare assistance for Mr. Mellor to help manage his condition and ensure adequate supervision for Liam. Additionally, we'll contact the Mellors to discuss childcare options." Dan exhaled in relief. He had potentially prevented a tragedy and helped ensure that Liam received the care and attention he needed. He had gone beyond his duty and made a difference in a child's life. As Mr. Mellor recovered at home, Dan found himself drawn back to them. He would stop by after his shift, sometimes with a bag of groceries, sometimes with a small toy for Liam. He learned that Liam loved dinosaurs and superheroes, and that he missed his parents. With great emotion, Dan discovered that Liam was a bright and inquisitive child, full of energy and curiosity, but also deeply sensitive and in need of affection. Dan, who had never been a father, found unexpected joy in spending time with Liam. He taught him how to throw a ball in the small backyard, helped him build an impressive blanket and chair fort in the living room, and read him bedtime stories with dramatic flair. He even took him to the police station, letting him sit in his patrol car, try on his cap, and meet his fellow officers, who were all charmed by the boy's enthusiasm. In return, Liam seemed to adore him. He would run to the door to greet him, his face lighting up with a smile capable of melting the hardest heart. He talked nonstop about his day, his toys, and his dreams of becoming a firefighter who rescued kittens from trees. He even asked Dan about his job, his eyes filled with fascination as Dan shared carefully chosen stories from his days on patrol. Dan began to look forward to these visits. Liam's innocence and enthusiasm were a breath of fresh air, a welcome contrast to the harsh realities of his job. He realized he was forming a bond with the little boy, a connection that went beyond his duty as a police officer. One afternoon, while visiting Liam, Dan noticed a framed photograph on the fireplace mantel. In it, a younger Mr. Mellor beamed with pride as he held a newborn baby wrapped in a blue blanket. "Is that you, Liam?" Dan asked, pointing at the photo. Liam nodded. "Grandpa said I was a very tiny baby and that I cried a lot." Dan studied the photograph, noticing the love in Mr. Mellor's eyes, the same love he now saw in Liam's eyes when he looked at his grandfather. Despite the challenges, this was a family bound by deep affection, a love that transcended distance and circumstances. As Mr. Mellor's health improved and he was able to return home, his spirits lifted at the thought of being back in familiar surroundings with the constant love of his cherished grandson. Dan continued to visit them, offering to help Mr. Mellor with household tasks, fixing a leaky faucet, mowing the overgrown lawn, and putting up new curtains. He played with Liam, building elaborate Lego castles, drawing fantastical creatures, and engaging in epic battles with toy dinosaurs. He shared meals with them, enjoying Mrs. Mellor's delicious casseroles and listening to Mr. Mellor's stories from his youth. Dan had become an essential figure in their lives, a source of support and stability, a constant presence in a world that often felt unpredictable and full of uncertainty. He was the one who took Liam to the park on breezy afternoons, pushing him on the swings until he erupted in laughter. He was the one who bandaged Liam's scraped knees and comforted him through nightmares. He was the one who patiently listened to Mr. Mellor's concerns about his health and his hopes for Liam's future. One evening, while having dinner with Liam and Mr. Mellor, Dan received a phone call. "Captain Bannet, there's been a robbery at a local jewelry store in Riverton. We need all available personnel. Can you handle it?" Dan apologized for having to leave so suddenly, promising Liam that he would return soon with a detailed account of the daring capture of the jewel thieves. As he drove toward the crime scene, the flashing lights of his patrol car reflecting off the wet asphalt, Dan felt a pang of guilt. He had grown accustomed to the quiet afternoons with Liam and Mr. Mellor, the simple pleasures of their company, the feeling of being needed and appreciated. He had grown attached to them, and he knew they had grown attached to him as well. The jewelry store case turned out to be more complicated than initially expected. It was linked to a series of robberies across the county, and Dan found himself working long hours following leads, interviewing suspects, and analyzing evidence. Days turned into weeks, and he had little time to visit Liam and Mr. Mellor. He called them regularly, making promises and offering apologies for his absence, his voice heavy with regret. Finally, after weeks of intense investigation, the case was solved. The culprits were arrested and the stolen jewelry was recovered. Exhausted but relieved, Dan drove straight to Elm Avenue, eager to see Liam and Mr. Mellor, to share the news of his victory and to reassure them that he had returned. He found them in the living room, playing checkers at a small table by the window. The moment Liam saw Dan, he leaped up and ran toward him, arms outstretched, his face beaming with joy. "Dan," he exclaimed, hugging him tightly. "You're back." Dan hugged Liam, feeling warmth spread through him, dissolving the exhaustion and lingering tension from the case. He had missed this feeling, the sense of being needed, of being part of something meaningful, of belonging. A few weeks later, Liam's parents returned from their extended business trip. Unsure of how they would react to his involvement in their lives, Dan decided to give them space. He stayed away from Elm Avenue, focusing on his work and trying to ignore the persistent emptiness that had settled in his heart. He told himself that he had done his duty, that Liam was safe and well cared for, and that it was time to step back. But thoughts of Liam, his bright smile, his infectious laughter, The way he ran into his arms filled him with a longing that was hard to ignore. One afternoon, while on patrol, Dan received a call from dispatch. "Officer Alice, Mr. and Mrs. Meller are at the station. They want to see you." Dan's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly who they were. He drove to the station with a mix of apprehension and anticipation swirling in his stomach, wondering what they wanted. Were they upset about his involvement? Would they accuse him of overstepping his boundaries? In the reception area, he found Liam's parents waiting for him. They were a well-dressed couple, their faces marked by a mixture of gratitude and guilt. Mrs. Meller, her eyes red from crying, held a bouquet of flowers. Mr. Meller stepped forward first, extending his hand. "We wanted to thank you for everything you've done for our son and for my father," he said. Mrs. Meller, her voice trembling with emotion, added, "We feel so relieved knowing that Liam had someone like you to care for him while we were away. We were so worried about him, about my father. We don't know how to thank you enough." Dan was stunned. He had expected resentment, maybe even anger, but instead, he was met with gratitude and appreciation. "It's been my pleasure," he stammered, feeling a flush rise to his cheeks. He wasn't used to being thanked for doing his job, let alone for something so personal, so close to his heart. "Liam talks about you all the time," Mrs. Meller continued, a smile breaking through her tears. "He says, you're the bravest, strongest, and kindest man I know." Dan's heart swelled with emotion. He had never thought of himself as a hero, but hearing those words from Liam's mother filled him with a deep sense of pride and purpose. He had made a difference in that child's life, and that realization was more rewarding than any medal or recognition. Liam's parents explained that their frequent business trips were a necessity, a sacrifice they made to provide a better life for their son. Both were successful entrepreneurs in their work required constant attention and travel. They had always felt guilty about leaving Liam in his grandfather's care, but they believed it was the best option for him. However, they now recognized that they had been neglecting Liam's emotional needs, blinded by their ambition and their desire to provide material comfort. They came to a painful realization: they had missed precious moments of their son's childhood, moments they could never get back. "We were so focused on building a future for Liam," Mr. Meller confessed, his voice heavy with regret, "that we forgot to be present in his present." Mrs. Meller nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "We read the social worker's reports and looked at ourselves in the mirror. We realized we were failing him." Determined to make a change, they decided to adjust their work schedules, reduce their travel, and become better parents. They also considered enrolling Liam in a daycare program where he could interact with other children and receive the attention he needed. "We want to be the parents Liam deserves," Mrs. Meller said with determination. "We want to be there for him, to share in his joys and sorrows, to watch him grow and learn. We want to be a family." Dan listened intently, impressed by their sincerity and willingness to change. He offered his support, assuring them that he would continue to be there for Liam and Mr. Meller, not as a police officer or a social worker, but as a friend. As he walked out of the station, he felt at peace. He had played a small role in helping this family find their way back to each other. He had potentially prevented a tragedy and ensured that Liam received the love and care he needed. He had gone beyond the call of duty and made a difference in a child's life. As Mr. Meller recovered at home, Dan felt drawn back to them. He continued visiting often, bringing groceries or small gifts for Liam. He learned that Liam loved dinosaurs and superheroes and missed his parents dearly. Dan discovered that Liam was a bright and inquisitive child, full of energy and curiosity, but also deeply sensitive and in need of affection. Through his relationship with Liam, Dan found a renewed sense of purpose and fulfillment. Inspired by his involvement with Liam and Mr. Meller, he began participating in community volunteer work and mentorship programs. As Liam grew, Dan marveled at his curiosity, boundless energy, and developing personality. He shared in his joys and sorrows, celebrated birthdays, offered comfort during illnesses, and simply cherished being present in their lives. Dan's experience with Liam transformed him. He was no longer just a police officer. He had become a mentor, a friend, and a father figure. He learned the value of compassion, importance of connection, and the power of love. He understood that true strength didn't just lie in physical ability or authority, but in empathy, kindness, and the willingness to help others. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Mr. Meller, watching Liam chase fireflies in the backyard, his laughter ringing through the twilight, Dan felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. He had found a place, a purpose of family. He turned to Mr. Meller, whose face was marked by years, but whose eyes shone with joy. "You know," Dan said softly, "I never thought I'd find a place like this. A family like this." Mr. Meller smiled, watching Liam's playful movements. "Sometimes life surprises you," he said. "It brings unexpected gifts, unexpected connections, unexpected love." Dan nodded, his heart full of gratitude. He had received an unexpected gift, one that had changed his life in ways he never could have imagined. He had found a family, a home, a purpose. He had found a love that transcended blood, Thaisa, love that healed the heart and gave new direction to life. Have you ever witnessed a small act of bravery that led to significant changes in someone's life? Let us know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends as well. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to watch more fascinating stories. Have a great day.